Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep into an important report from Peru.
Oh, this is a fascinating one.
It is. It is. It's from ONAMIAP,
Yeah.
which is the National Organization of Andean and Amazonian Indigenous Women of Peru.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful,
Okay.
but their work is so important. This report shines a light on the inequalities Indigenous women face,
Right.
especially when it comes to things like poverty, healthcare,
Yeah.
and education. And what really stood out to me is that this report was published in June 2020,
Oh, wow.
right when the COVID-19 pandemic was hitting hard.
Talk about a tough time to be facing all those existing challenges.
I know, it's like, adding fuel to the fire.
Definitely. It
Yeah.
makes this report even more timely, I think,
Oh.
because it's a snapshot of their situation right before everything changed.
Right.
And they frame these issues through the lens of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals.
Oh, the SDGs.
Exactly. Which, those are like, think of them like a global wish list
Okay.
for a better future for everyone. Things like ending poverty, ensuring quality education for everyone, gender equality.
So it's like, are those goals like actually being met in Peru, I mean?
Well, that's what this report tries to answer.
Okay.
And it paints, well, it's complicated.
I bet.
Peru is seen like pretty good economic growth,
Mm. Hmm.
but it hasn't reached everyone equally.
So even when a country's economy is doing well, it doesn't mean everyone's benefiting.
Right. And a lot of that growth comes from industries like mining and agribusiness.
Okay.
And they often operate, on indigenous lands. Sometimes they even displace communities.
Oh, wow. So the very industries that are supposed to be lifting the country up are actually hurting the most vulnerable.
Yeah, in a lot of cases. It makes you think about, like, what development really means.
It's
Is it just about dollars and cents?
right.
Or is it about people? This report really pushes us to think about that.
I like that. So let's dig into the specifics. The report kind of starts by tackling that first goal, ending poverty. Mm-hmm.
And the data is pretty alarming, right?
It is. So while about 20% of Peruvians overall live in poverty, for people whose first language is indigenous, that number jumps to over 32%.
That's a huge difference.
It is. And when you look closer, it's even worse for indigenous children and teenagers.
Really?
Yeah, especially in rural areas.
It really makes you think,
I know,
it
it's-
challenges that idea that poverty is just a personal failing, Like, if you're poor, it's your own fault.
Exactly. If so many kids are struggling, especially concentrated in certain communities, it shows that something bigger is going on.
It's systemic.
Yeah, definitely. And the report, it connects the dots between poverty and healthcare, too. Because indigenous children are facing way higher rates of anemia and chronic malnutrition.
Right.
And those are directly linked to economic hardship.
Of course. I mean, if you can't afford nutritious food, you're going to see those health consequences.
Yeah.
There was one statistic that really hit me hard. It was about the Matsagengas communities.
Oh, almost 65% of young children there have moderate anemia. Like, that's almost 2 out of every 3 kids.
Yeah, it's a crisis. And it shows why that next goal, quality education, is so important. Because the report found that 2 out of every 10 indigenous women in Peru can't read or write,
Wow.
which is double the rate for indigenous men.
That's a huge gap. Is that worse in some parts of the country than others?
It seems like the Amazon region is having the most trouble. They have the highest illiteracy rates for indigenous women.
So what's behind that? What are like the main reasons why so many indigenous girls are missing out on education?
Well, the report, it points to a few different factors.
Okay.
Some families can't afford schooling. Some girls are pressured to help out at home.
Yeah.
And then there's some really scary safety concerns.
Yeah.
Just finishing secondary school is like a major obstacle for a lot of these girls. A lot of indigenous students have to travel miles to get to school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe even live away from home as a young girl.
Right.
That's scary.
That's really dangerous. Yeah.
It puts them at a much higher risk of harassment and violence.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
I think the report mentions some problems with student housing too, right?
It did, yeah.
Yeah.
There's some pretty bad conditions in a lot of student residences.
That's awful.
And it's despite the fact that the Ombudsman's office has been pushing for improvements.
Wow. So it's like they're being set up to fail almost.
That feels like it, yeah. It's the cycle of neglect that just keeps holding these girls back.
It's heartbreaking. Then there's the situation in Condor Conqui,
Oh, yeah.
which is just terrifying. The report talks about all these cases of sexual violence against Olajan school children,
It's really hard to even think about.
and the perpetrators are teachers.
It's awful. is like the worst possible betrayal.
I know. It's hard to even process that.
It really shows how all these factors like systemic bias, poverty, and violence all come together
Yeah.
to create this almost impossible situation for Indigenous girls.
If you want to get an education, it's like you're being punished for it.
Basically, yeah.
This is heavy stuff. But the report doesn't just stop at the problems, does it? I mean, there are solutions too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where things start to feel a little better.
Okay, good.
One of the biggest recommendations is to include what they call the ethnic variable in all government data and policies.
Okay, I'm curious, but I'm not really sure what that means.
So basically, it means recognizing that you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach
Right.
in a country as diverse as Peru.
Of course.
The government needs to collect data that shows what's really happening in Indigenous communities,
Okay.
and then use that data to make policies that actually work for them.
So instead of just looking at like national averages,
Right.
they have to zoom in and see what's going on in specific communities.
Exactly. You have to make the invisible visible.
That's a good way to put it.
Like, for example, think about healthcare programs that are designed using data about the health needs of different Indigenous groups.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's what it means to use the ethnic variable.
It's about actually tailoring the solutions to the specific problems people are facing.
Exactly. And the report also talks about needing intersectional solutions,
Okay.
which means you can't just address these issues one by one.
Right, because they're all connected.
Exactly. You have to think about how gender, ethnicity, and socioeconomic factors all work together.
Okay, that sounds really important, but can you give me an example?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's go back to education. The report recommends that all educational programs,
Okay.
from early childhood all the way to higher education, should incorporate a rights-based approach
Mm-hmm.
and an understanding of interculturality and gender.
So it's not just about getting kids in school.
Right.
It's about what they're learning and how they're learning it.
Exactly. The content and the way it's taught have to be culturally relevant
Yeah.
and sensitive to the needs of Indigenous girls.
Yeah.
And it also means addressing the things that cause gender inequality.
Okay.
Like the report calls for measures to protect Indigenous women and girls from violence, including sexual violence,
Yeah.
throughout their lives.
That's a huge piece of this. And I remember the report also talked about economic empowerment, right?
Yeah.
Making sure Indigenous communities have real chances to improve their lives.
Absolutely. It urges the government to include things to help Indigenous economies recover in their bigger economic recovery plans.
Okay.
So think about things like supporting traditional crafts and agriculture,
Right.
promoting ecotourism initiatives led by Indigenous communities,
Mm-hmm.
and making sure they have fair access to markets.
So it's not just about giving people money.
Right.
It's about giving them the tools to help themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And importantly, the report emphasizes that Indigenous communities have to be involved in the decisions.
Yeah.
They shouldn't just be passive recipients of aid.
Right. They need a voice.
Exactly. They need to be at the table when policies are being made that affect their lives.
This report is calling for a whole new way of thinking about development, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's a challenge to the Peruvian government, but it also has lessons for the rest of the world, too.
What do you mean?
It makes us ask ourselves, how can we work to get rid of inequality?
Yeah.
How can we make sure that development doesn't leave anyone behind?
Those are big questions.
They are.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes. I had no idea about all the challenges Indigenous women in Peru are dealing with.
That's great, though.
Yeah.
It's all about challenging what we think we know,
Right.
being open to learning from different perspectives,
Yeah.
and speaking up for a world that's more just and equitable.
Absolutely. And speaking of learning, that whole idea of the ethnic variable has really stuck with me. It seems like such a crucial starting point. You know?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You can't fix a problem if you don't even know it's there, right?
Exactly. The report says that all those official studies, data records,
Mm-hmm.
they should all include this variable
Yeah.
so they can accurately reflect what's happening with Indigenous people,
It's about shining a light on those hidden realities.
making the invisible visible.
Right.
I keep thinking about that statistic about the lack of data on COVID-19
Yeah.
and how it impacted Indigenous communities.
It's a perfect example, really.
It really shows that if you're not tracking it, you can't really address it.
If you don't have the data, you can't understand the problem and you can't come up with solutions.
So this has been really eye-opening for me.
Good. I'm glad.
But I think some people listening might be wondering, what does this have to do with me?
Yeah,
These issues seem so far away.
I get that.
Yeah.
But it's all connected, you know? This deep dive into Peru, I think it shows just how important it is to look at the impact of development.
Mm-hmm.
Even in countries that seem to be doing well economically,
Yeah.
we have to ask who's benefiting from all this growth.
Right.
And who's being left behind?
That's a question we should be asking everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not just in Peru.
It also makes me think about whose voices we're hearing. This report wouldn't exist without ONIMIAP,
Go.
an organization led by Indigenous women.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are experiencing these things firsthand.
Absolutely.
And they're the ones fighting for change.
It's so important to listen to those voices, to amplify them.
Especially women.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Their experiences are so valuable for understanding these issues.
And for finding solutions that actually work.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here? This report feels like a call to action.
It is.
But what can we actually do?
Well, I think the report from ONIMIAP shows us that sustainable development is more than just economics.
It's about people.
It's about social justice, making sure that everyone has a chance to live a good life.
That's a powerful message.
It is. But it can feel overwhelming, right?
Yeah, like where do you even start?
It starts with awareness. Just by learning about these issues, listening to the people who are affected, we're taking that first step. Then we can start thinking about how to use our voices and our actions to make a difference.
Whether it's supporting organizations like ONIMIAP or talking to our friends and family about this stuff.
It all matters.
Yeah.
Every little bit helps.
It sounds like we all have a part to play.
We do. One last thought I want to leave you with. The report says that to really achieve equality, we need to change the way we think about development.
Okay.
We need to move away from just focusing on the economy and start prioritizing the well-being of people and the planet.
What would it take to make that happen? I mean...
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about.
It definitely has.
And maybe even inspired you to learn more and get involved.